Hallelujah. Praise the Lord. Let's begin with an Om, dedicating our time together to the benefit, to the highest good of all that is. Om. Great. So, we've been discussing the definition of yoga, and this is our working definition of yoga. We've got the Chin Mudra, okay? Chin Mudra. The individual self bows down to the universal self. Union. Union with the universal self. That's yoga. And the ego, the mind, and the world are done with. Ordinarily, the individual self is hanging out with the ego, mind, and the world. But here, no, the individual self says, I am more than this. And it bows down to the universal self, letting go of its attachment to the ego, mind, and the world. And it yokes with the universal. And ego, mind, and world no more. So, thought we could discuss that a bit more because there's obviously a lot happening in this hand gesture. In fact, that hand gesture story goes that, I'm not going to remember the name, but someone knows. But anyway, there was a great spiritual teacher. You could call it sage or even, incarnation of the divine, whatever floats your boat. Great spiritual teacher had these students, and the students were not really able to get enlightened. I believe the name is Dakshinamurti, actually. It's incarnation of Lord Shiva. But Dakshinamurti is known for teaching in silence. So this is the silent teaching. That's it. And so he had these students who were looking to make the leap to enlightenment. And without saying a word, he just held up his hand, and they understood. They got it. They understood with that. So, there we go. And I think let's dissect the ego, mind, and world, because if we're the individual self bowing down, yoking with the universal self, it's good to know what we're letting go of when we let go of the ego, the mind, and the world. So the ego, Lego my ego, or as Swami Satchidananda says, you just, I don't know, maybe you didn't say this, but just basically you say, go, get rid of it, get it out of here. And basically, you could call the ego any part of us that resonates with the idea of selfishness, and particularly selfishness with regards to identifying with the individual human form and then acting on behalf of the good of the individual human form and perhaps its family and friends without considering the well-being of the whole. So, and especially perhaps easiest to understand with the senses, right? So, good example to understand selfish behavior. I mean, this is like kindergarten 101, but that's what spiritual path is a lot, is it's going back to the basics, just like be kind, be nice to people. That is a very high level spiritual practice, especially if you practice it unconditionally, universally, in all circumstances. Just something as simple as be nice to everyone and everything. Imagine if you actually applied that and how simple that is, and yet how powerful, right? So, spirituality, the teachings are ultimately simple. It's like kindergarten again. But to take the lessons we've learned in kindergarten sincerely, to take them to heart, that requires abundance of humility, right? Because our intellects, especially as we're now in these grown adult bodies and everything, we want to think that we're so smart and intelligent and that we know so much. And then someone tells you that all they have to do for spiritual growth is to be kind to everyone. It's like, oh, what? No, No, no. What you have to do for spiritual growth is you have to stand on one leg and have your arm extended for 40 plus years. And people actually do that stuff, which is interesting. Of course, the cool thing is any you can do anything with an intention of and for spiritual growth. So, in the name of spiritual growth and service to humanity, I could extend my arm out and hold it there for the rest of my life, and that can be my discipline for this life. And I'm doing that, for the greater glory of God and in testament to the truth or whatever it is. People do that. Thankfully, as far as I'm aware, such drastic measures are not necessary, but really to pursue something like enlightenment, state of yoga all the time is quite a drastic decision, and it is, in a way, you could say, the highest goal and the highest aspiration a human can strive for, to transcend the ego, to transcend the mind, to transcend the world, to yoke your own consciousness with the universal, cosmic, divine consciousness. That is the ultimate. That's the peak. So Swami Satchidananda likes to talk about climbing Mount Everest. Even once you're at the top of Mount Everest, you don't even get to rest. You have to go down immediately. But it's called ever rest. But the spiritual path, it really is ever rest. Once you're there, it's all good. I might not have done justice to that little anecdote, whatever you call it. So, back to this. So, let's talk about the ego, selfishness, right? So, it can either be what is it to be selfish? Well, way I've heard it said by Dr. Hawkins that the game the ego plays in all variety of names and forms is its seeking of subjective pleasure and gain. So subjective, more or less, meaning that it's identifying with a separate entity, and that the gain or the pleasure is that belongs to that entity and not all. Okay, so subjective pleasure and gain. That's what the ego's game is. Gain, basically, and pleasure. Okay, so pleasure, a lot of it you can think of the sensory experiences, whether it's and particularly with food, I think is where anyone really falls most victim to it. Of course, you could also be selfish with sensory experiences as far as lusting goes, or maybe music, but sound is less common. But the tongue and tasting is really the main one where people have challenges. And Swami Satchidananda has a saying that the spiritual journey begins when you tame the tongue. That's actually the first step. I mean, and the tongue is so powerful, and it's the only organ that actually has both an internal and external function, in that you bring in food and it serves a tasting function, but it's also organ for speech. So you bring in things and you put things out. So if you have mastery of the tongue, very powerful and great step on the path. So mastery over the tongue, to not act selfishly on behalf of the tongue, right? A glutton would be the word, and gluttony is what we would be abstaining from if we are in that state. There's no gluttony in this state. Versus, the ego might pop up and it wants some cake, right? Eating cake, not necessarily a bad thing, but and really anything in moderation, more or less. Even moderation and moderation, right? So, but to have, 5 cakes or something like that, you can see there's clearly a tipping point where it's even damaging to yourself. It only satisfies this very short-term sensory indulging, but it harms you in the long run. And you could argue it for 1 piece of cake or 3 or 5. The quantity doesn't really matter. The point is, with anything, even kale. Of course, if you had a choice between cake and kale, I think we could say kale that's feeding your body in a way that, let's just say, it enhances its overall performance and ability to serve, which is great. And that would be, qualified as selfless. To eat in the context of enhancing your capacity to serve and to give and contribute to humanity. That's a beautiful thing. Versus to eat in the context of, I'm going to enjoy this food and who knows how it's going to impact me in the long run. There's not as much awareness or consciousness there. Granted, anyway, it's a fine line, and not trying to be dogmatic about food choices. It's just an example to show how there can be the selfishness versus the selflessness. And spiritual journey, letting go of the ego, is more and more considering the benefit and the well-being of all, rather than just what is this sensory experience. Am I just seeking subjective pleasure and gain, or am I seeking gain for the whole creation by being able to serve better, by being more energetic, more loving, more peaceful, more conscious? So to consider the welfare of all. And there's a saying by Mahatma Gandhi, joy in life comes from living for the welfare of all. And that is a beautiful thing. And anything you do can be done in that spirit. That's really the big overarching picture we have. You don't, and of course the saying too, there are no great acts, only small acts done with great love. So it's not about saving the world, but it's about just taking care of this moment and contributing, loving this moment, caring for it however you can. Give what you can give to this moment. Take care of your human vessel as best you can. Treat it like an adorable pet that you love and care for so much. You would never poison your pet, right? You want to give your pet only the best food. You want to give it proper exercise. You want to give it good mental food. You want to give it beautiful music to listen to. And you want to keep it clean and all those things. So you've got to take care of everything with, loving awareness and kindness, gentleness, compassion. And so really, the ego, it's that identifies with the animal body, the human animal, right? It's what it is. Versus identifying with all, identifying with the whole creation and even beyond that. So in a state of yoga, no harm to anyone or anything. And with some awareness that thou art that, right? If I harm another, that's actually me harming myself. The oneness. So oneness. Okay, so we touched on the ego. We'll get into it more because it is really a great point of focus and important to understand. Some saying about you first need to know the enemy, right, before you conquer it. And disclaimer, let's not consider the ego an enemy. My favorite teaching regarding how to contextualize the ego is that it is basically just that you melt the ego with compassion. So that's what, if I notice I have this strong desire to eat the cake, right? And it's like overwhelming, I don't need to condemn it, but I can have compassion for it. See, it's the human condition, right? If the tongue has somehow learned that cake and sugar taste good and everything, yeah, it's going to want it. And it's not a terrible thing. And so you can see everything in the light of understanding that it's just human nature is just the ego. It's the animal, and there's nothing to condemn about it. You can witness it. You can see it in everyone and everything. The animal tendencies playing out, seeking pleasure and gain. Human nature, human condition. So judge not lest ye be not judged, and you just melt with compassion, compassionate understanding. Let's close. Om Loka samusta sukhino bhavantu. May the entire universe be filled with peace, joy, love, and light. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Thank you. Hallelujah.